No pressure.
Not now, anyway. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Denny, for inviting us down here. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I think this is awesome. June 9th, 8 of the 9 northern institutions had a very similar event. We're trying to really get our message across. Corrections has been neglected for years, and it's really starting to catch up with us. It's noticeable. We can see it, we feel it, we recognize it. A lot of people have spoken about health and safety issues and assaults. Chris Butch made a very poignant quote, "We're not supported." And I think the biggest reason why we're not supported is we do not have adequate labor relations. We're very fortunate in the sense that we have strong provincial health and safety committees, we have strong MERC committees, we have strong dedicated bargaining teams now in place. We have that. Our mandate is to negotiate fairly. Our mandate and all the committee works we do, whether it's locally or provincially, our mandate is to negotiate fairly, openly, transparently. We want to discuss, we want to talk. However, the employer does not meet us that way. They do not have that same approach with us. So our labor relations in this province is fractured and it's dysfunctional. Mostly in part because the employer, they just don't care. I'm in my 20th year as a correctional officer, a dedicated public servant. I'm the president of Local 369, Central North Correctional Center. This is my second term. As I speak to other people across my local or in other ministries or other institutions, I always hear the same thing, that we were once proud, we were once dedicated, but I think unfortunately that is becoming harder and harder to fulfill. I look back on 20 years and I can recall the social contract days of Bob Ray. I can recall the labor disruptions under Mike Harris in 96 and 02. I certainly can recall the secretiveness surrounding the closure of Guelph CC that lasted about 5 years. So for 5 years, we had Guelph Correctional Correctional Center staff not knowing where they were going to be. That's a shame. It's absolutely a shame. Privatization is always an uncertainty for us. As we come into more modern times, more recent times, I can recall the 3-year hiring freeze that we had to face, and that caused subsequent staffing shortages, which we all have to bear now. Increased levels of violence that was spoken of. The Hamilton vest scandal a few years ago. It was a shame that happened, but the employer forced that. Toronto South was open, was built, completed, yet it sat open for well over a year at a cost to $1 million a month to this province. $1 million a month. And the employer's answer was simply, oh well. Those millions and millions of dollars could have done wonders for increased inmate programming, increased staff levels, increased protective equipment for us, but no. They just sat there and they just paid the bill monthly. Labor relations, by definition, rests on 3 simple steps or 3 simple tenets. A healthy labor relationship ought to provide us with, number 1, what we want. And when I say we, I mean both sides. What we want, a substantive outcome. Last February, our retiree benefits were cut, were slashed, were attacked. Can anyone in here tell me that meets our needs? Can anyone here tell me that we negotiated that somehow fairly? It wasn't. It was forced down our throats. And that's a shame on this government. I've worked 20 years looking at the end of it, thinking I'm going to have a pension, I'm going to have some benefits, I'm going to be able to have maybe a modest life. And with a stroke of a pen, this government took that away from me and everyone in this room. Number 2, a healthy labor relations ought to provide peace of mind. Anyone work for the public service, do you have peace of mind right now? I know I don't. One of the biggest things that correctional officers face in terms of peace of mind, and I'm insulted by this, that this happens, but each and every time Force is used on an inmate. Legal, lawful force is used on an inmate. Each and every time that inmate is asked on whether or not he wants to press charges against correctional officers. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting that this happens. This is part of their policy. That does nothing but criminalize my profession. It makes me into a criminal. That question every time. And I'm disgusted by it. But it happens every time force is used. Sometimes that inmate is asked if he wants to press charges in front of the officer who actually used force. Who's empowered here? The inmate or the staff dedicated to run this place? So it does not provide peace of mind. Lastly, good labor relations ought to be able to deal with our differences. We ought to be able to mediate our differences. Well, again, I ask you, just with the fact, with the stroke of a pen, they remove our retiree benefits. Is that rectifying differences? I certainly don't think so. I'd like to close with a quote. Some of you may recognize it, but it's a direct quote from a government document. And it states, "The government continues to respect the collective bargaining process. Collective bargaining enhances the ability of responsible employers and bargaining agents to increase productivity, deliver services, and ensure fiscal sustainability. Any modest wage increases that are negotiated must be absorbed by employers within available funding and within Ontario's existing fiscal plan for efficiency and productivity gains or other trade-offs, so that service levels continue to meet public demands. Ontario public sector settlements continue to be below the average of those in the private sector, municipal sector, and federal public sector." And that quote comes out of a document called Building Opportunity, Securing Our Future, otherwise known as the Ontario budget, that was announced a few months ago, and Wynne has announced that she's going to move forward with this. So the last quote I find really interesting. The government recognizes Ontario public sector settlements continue to be below the average. We just come out of a 3-year wage freeze. The Premier was recently in the news announcing another 4 years wage freeze. That's 7. Compound that with inflation, that's a decrease in pay. And this employer plans to negotiate fairly with us. This employer, putting that in the media now, respects the bargaining process. That employer is spending millions of dollars on renovations for barracks for their employers. At my institution, this institution, Thunder Bay, Central East, and they have good labor relations. It's a shame. Lastly, it's easy to stand up here and to find fault. There is fault. But I think the message that we also need to put forward is what we're looking for, what we need. And one of the things we really need is labor relations to be effective. We want it to be respectful. We want to work with both sides, where both sides listen to each other, where we work out solutions, we work out problems. I want to have meaningful input into my workplace and the workplace within the province. I don't know about anybody else. I want to be treated professionally like other justice sector personnel. But as far as I'm concerned, we've been pushed. We've been pushed for years. And I think it's time we start pushing back. Thank you.